Now, more recently, and particularly here in the U.S., we've had some objections to the Gardasil vaccine for cervical cancer among some conservative Christians who claim that vaccinating their young daughters against a virus that causes cervical cancer and genital warts will somehow cause them to be more likely to engage in premarital sex, I guess, or it's somehow...
Just like when you give them condoms.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You give those kids condoms, and all of a sudden they're going to say, whoa, what's this? Oh my gosh, I could be having sex. Yeah, that's a good argument.
Yeah.
Trust me, they were thinking about it before you ever gave them a condom.
Yeah, I don't think that the threat of cervical cancer is going to be much of a deterrent to a hot and heavy teenager in the backseat of a car. So, but anyway, that's their argument. And then, of course, there's this whole anti-government argument. You can't tell me how to raise my kid. And, you know, I mean, I don't advocate government involvement in parenting decisions necessarily, but there is a public health issue here. Some of the other interesting things, there was recently in August a report of a mumps outbreak in Canada. And they traced the mumps outbreak to this small religious group that had pursued exemption from vaccination. They simply didn't believe that it conferred any immunity or that they should do this. Now, this kind of highlights one of the problems with religious groups that pursue exemptions. They tend to live in close together in communities that regularly associate with each other. And part of the problem with that is if you have a bunch of people who pursue exemptions in that same community, then herd immunity within that group drops to a level where it no longer protects people who are unvaccinated. And so you have people who are unvaccinated because their parents chose not to vaccinate them, and then you have people who are too young to receive the vaccine. And everyone in that group becomes at risk of the disease. We see this in this mumps outbreak, which incidentally is not necessarily a benign childhood disease either. We also saw this in the 2005 measles outbreak, which occurred in a, let me see if I have this information here. The 2005 measles outbreak was actually in a religious group in Pennsylvania, and the group did not believe in vaccination, got exempt, and there were I forget how many cases of measles in that group, but the majority of cases in that group were in people who were not vaccinated. Interesting thing about the measles as a disease is about 90 to 95% infectious. It's spread as a respiratory virus, so people coughing spray the infectious droplets out there, and then anybody walking by can basically get it. Historically, you saw large outbreaks among school-age kids when they first got to school, because then they were exposed to a whole bunch of other people, and if they were, at the time, like back in the early 60s, there was no effective vaccine against it. So you had a bunch of immunologically naive kids in a school setting. It was perfect for transmission of a respiratory virus. So it would go like wildfire through these schools. And then, of course, you'd have this like rise and fall of infection as you had a group of people who became relatively immune. Herd immunity went up, infection rate went down. And then after a few years, as herd immunity waned, because new kids came in that had never had it before, suddenly the infection rate would spike again. And so that was in the 90 to 95% infection rate. We know that from epidemiological studies that showed that if you took the birth cohort in any given year, you could look in subsequent years and about 90 to 95% would contract measles in a subsequent year. So epidemiology 101. Okay.
By the way, I've already found a verse that's better.
Okay, what do you got?
In Deuteronomy 12. Oh, wait, that's old. Oh, yes, it still counts.
Yeah.
I lost my page. Deuteronomy 12, beginning at around verse 21. If the place where the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you, you may slaughter animals from the herds of the flocks that God has given you, as I've commanded you in your own towns. You may eat as much of them as you want. Here's where we get to something kind of peculiar, because this would have never occurred to me. Eat them as you would gazelle or deer. Both the ceremonially unclean and the clean may eat, but be sure you do not eat the blood. Now, that is so important. We're talking here about ingesting blood. It's so important that he says it again several times. Be sure you do not eat the blood, because the blood is life, and you must not eat the life with the meat. You must not eat the blood, pour it out on the ground like water. Do not eat it, so that it may go well with you and your children. How many times in a row do you have to tell somebody, don't eat the blood? There's something going on here with regard to consuming blood and blood sacrifices. But I think if you're going to try and dig through the Bible for any, I don't know, passage about blood that would be closer to anti-vaccination, I think I found it in about 2 minutes. So drop that Luke 13 passage. It just looks stupid.
Well, and actually I think that Deuteronomy passage is the basis for the Jehovah's Witnesses' rejection of blood transfusion,
It could be, although that's about animal blood, which is why I went with the vaccination. Now, I'd have to find another passage about, well, there's other passages there where, you know, blood is life, and he who sheds innocent blood, and those types of things. Anyway, back to the topic at hand.
Well, so we've got a couple of things. I've talked a little bit about, you know, this obscure group, maybe they're not so obscure, in Florida that welcomed Andrew Wakefield in here, the Good News Doctor Foundation. And of course, you know, we talk a little bit about what other groups oppose vaccination. I think the Christian Scientists are pretty well known. They're kind of famous for opposing medical care. But surprisingly, there's a couple of others here. In particular, I've got a quote here from a Muslim doctor in Britain who is urging Muslims not to vaccinate their children against such diseases as measles, mumps, and rubella because it's un-Islamic. And he bases this on the fact that, as he says, almost all vaccines contain products derived from animal and human tissue, which makes them unlawful for Muslims to take. And let's see, Islam permits only the consumption of what they consider, it's called halal, it's I guess the equivalent of kosher, where the animal has had its throat cut and bled to death while God's name is invoked. So unless your cell line was produced by cutting the animal's throat while God's name was invoked, I guess it's not Islamic for you to have the vaccine.
And maybe they're just setting up a cottage industry of Islamic-friendly vaccines, where every time they inject the needle, you have to do it into the jugular, and you know, Akbar, Allah Akbar, you know.
Yeah. Well, and he goes on to say that many vaccines, especially those given to children, are full of these forbidden substances: human parts, gelatin from pork, alcohol, animal monkey parts, all coming from the West, who do not have knowledge of Islamic practices.
Hey, we know about Islamic practices. We just think it's stupid.
Yeah.
To deny yourself the advantages of modern medicine because somebody didn't slice the beast's throat and utter the name of some magical, invisible friend.
Well, and I've got a list of, I guess I have it with me here. I think it's on my computer here somewhere, but I have a list of all the stuff that's in vaccines. I didn't find gelatin from pork. I didn't actually find human parts either. There's some stem cell lines in there.
That's a part. I mean, you know, pieces, you know, it's not like you got to find a finger like you're, you know, getting chili at Wendy's or something. But, you know, by the way, that was a fake. The person faked that. I don't want Wendy's to come saying, stop spreading that rumor. So there you go. I'm helping you out. But yeah, I don't know. Parts is as poorly defined as kinds when you're talking about people, you know, the anti-evolution crowd talking about, you know, well, animals reproduce after their kind, but that doesn't necessarily mean species. And it's an ill-defined term that they can use however. So I'm not too bothered by parts. Parts is parts. There's an old commercial.
Okay, and then,